Download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources at savantwealth.com/guides.
Hello and welcome to today's Savant Live webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are going to be discussing preserving generational wealth. My name is Alaina Davalos and I am a wealth transfer advisor. Joining me is financial advisor Evan Kuykendall.
Hey, thanks, Alaina. Glad to be here. This topic is an important one to address, and a lot of people may not be thinking about the tax implications, how we do it, and what we teach to the next generation. So hopefully we can start to help you think about some of these things today as we start to discuss.
Evan and I were very excited to present on this subject because it's a really buzzy topic. Everyone is talking about generational wealth and the great wealth transfer that's about to happen. So we figured, why not give you some pointers to help you participate in this movement as intelligently and tax efficiently as you can. So what is generational wealth? Technically, it's wealth that's being passed down at your death, generally to your descendants or heirs. However, generational wealth is also a concept that hits home to a lot of families because it represents their legacy and their success. It represents this idea that you worked hard enough during your life that you'll be remembered by your grandkids for years and years to come because of this financial gift you're giving them. It's pretty much the epitome of success in America. So, just a quick overview of our conversation today. We're going to start by talking about estate planning, one of the best tools out there to safeguard your legacy for future generations. We'll then move on to talking about lifetime gifting, as well as some ways to maximize the amounts you can pass to future generations by making some savvy tax decisions. And lastly, we'll finish with a discussion on passing down not just money and assets, but also the knowledge that comes with managing great wealth, as well as some tips on how to preserve the integrity of the funds you're passing down without creating the notorious trust fund baby. So, all right, let's delve into some estate planning tools that you can use to help preserve your wealth for future generations. And just a reminder, estate planning is based on state law. So while we're talking about some general concepts today, make sure you work with a local qualified attorney in your state of residence if you want to implement any of these ideas into your estate plan. Now, Evan might disagree with this statement, but I'm going to say it. Estate planning is the best tool that you have to preserve your wealth, not just for your children and your grandchildren, but as far down your family tree as your bloodline will go. If it's right for your family and your set of circumstances, an estate plan that establishes trust for your descendants is the best way to preserve generational wealth. The sort of trust I'm going to be talking about today is referred to as a descendants trust or a cascading trust, because once you put assets into the trust, either during lifetime or at death, the assets will stay in trust for cascading generations. So first to your kids, then your grandkids, and so on. Another term that you may be more familiar with is a trust fund. So that's right, we're going to be talking about how to create trust funds for your descendants. A lot of times these trusts get a bad reputation because they're seen as only for really wealthy people or as controlling assets from the grave. This is a phrase or a worry that I usually try to avoid because it has a pretty negative connotation. No one wants to be labeled as a control freak. But hear me out. If a trust works for your family, you can protect assets for a possible unlimited amount of generations from divorce, creditors, and possible estate taxes. How long the trust lasts depends on state law. It can range from 90 years to an unlimited number of years, and most states are only getting more and more flexible. So why doesn't everyone do this? Why do we only associate trust funds with the wealthy? And that's a question I get when we start talking about these descendants trusts. For starters, a trust can be more complicated to both set up and to administer. These trusts are often established under your will or revocable living trust, so your core estate planning document. You will have more decision making that you have to do. You have to pick a trustee. You have to pick a distribution term for the trust, meaning when is income and principal distributed out of the trust to the beneficiary. You have to pick how long the trust is going to last. But on the flip side, you can leave your legacy, the assets you've worked so hard for, to your descendants in this protected vehicle that can protect that wealth, again, from divorce, creditors, and other taxes. I tell our clients all the time that these descendants trusts can, with good management and not too many family branches spawning off, last for centuries. I don't want to get too bogged down in trust formation because it's such an advanced topic in and of itself, but I will give you a quick overview. You name a trustee to manage the trust fund on behalf of the beneficiary. You can give your trustee as much or as little guidance, control from the grave, as you feel comfortable with. If you do decide to set up trusts for your descendants, they're most oftentimes created under your will or revocable living trust and are only effective at your death. That means those documents and the decisions that you made in them can usually be changed at any time. These trusts are called testamentary trusts, and they become irrevocable upon your death. Your other option in your estate plan to a trust is to make an outright distribution to your beneficiaries. This is an easier plan. I won't lie about that. You say in your will, I leave 50% of my estate to my son and 50% to my daughter outright and free of trust. You name both your son and your daughter as 50% beneficiaries on your 401k and life insurance. Easy peasy. The downside to this outright gifting is that once those inherited assets are freely gifted to your beneficiary, they have no asset protection. Your daughter can go and spend her entire inheritance on a Lamborghini and leave nothing to your grandchildren. Your son could commingle his assets with his wife's, and when she leaves him in the divorce and takes all his money, nothing is left for your grandchildren. Once you're gone, the money could be gone. Outright gifts typically do not lead to generational wealth. And so, no matter what sort of estate plan you create, one of the other best ways to preserve generational wealth is to not lose it at your death. We all know the horror stories of friends and even our own families that when someone passed away without a good estate plan, it created a lot of tension between family members. Sometimes that tension gets so bad, someone will go to court. And let me tell you, once lawyer myself, and the court get involved, things can get really expensive. And all those funds, your lifetime savings, your legacy can quickly be eaten away by legal and court fees. When I've seen an estate plan gone wrong, most oftentimes it was because the assets weren't coordinated the way they should have been. Spouses didn't own property as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, meaning they had to probate the will. Some people never updated the beneficiaries of their 401k after a divorce, like my father, and an old spouse received that asset instead of the kids. There's a lot of issues that can come up with different assets. So honestly, the best place to start to avoid this scenario is to have a good net worth statement and make sure every asset you have is coordinated in terms of your overall plan. Take a look at where all your assets are located and then work with your professional advisors to determine how they're going to pass at your death. Getting organized like this not only helps to avoid expensive issues at your death, but if you've taken my previous advice and included descendants trust in your estate plan, you've got to make sure that those trusts are fully funded, meaning all of the assets, or at least the ones you pick from your net worth statement, are pouring into those trusts at your death or when it's time for your kids to receive their inheritance. So I usually tell clients that getting their estate planning documents drafted is step one. Once you have your will, powers of attorney, and possibly a revocable living trust signed, you've then got to move on to step two, which is aligning your beneficiaries. Again, when you've got that net worth statement, you're in a lot better position to get this done. A lot of people assume that a will controls everything, but that is not the case. A beneficiary designation on your 401k will overrule what's written in your will, even if that's not what you intended. Or let's say you loan your daughter money for her first home purchase. Unless that agreement is in writing, there's no guarantee that your daughter will pay your estate back for that money that she borrowed. Lots of these little inconsistencies can lead to outright gifts that you didn't intend or unfunded descendants trust. So let's say you did what I suggested, and incorporated that descendants trust into your will. Now what? Well, step two, let's make sure that any assets not covered by your will still pass to the descendants trust, beneficiaries of your life insurance trust. Your kids outright? Nope. Get that new beneficiary designation form and change that to the trust created under your will. Personal residence that you own as joint tenants with rights of survivorship with your second spouse? Nope, because that piece of property would pass directly to that new spouse instead of under your will where it belongs. With a descendants trust, you can generally put any asset into it. Some just take more coordination than others. There is, however, one exception, and that is qualified accounts. Qualified accounts, meaning your IRAs, your 401ks, they have special rules because of the special income tax treatment that they receive during your lifetime. Now, Evan can confirm, we could spend hours going through the different income tax ramifications of naming certain beneficiaries on your qualified accounts, which include those 401ks, 403bs, all sorts of IRAs. But we're not going to do that today. First off, because we don't have time, and second off, because it's a little dry. You can, though, name a trust as a beneficiary of a qualified account. The trust has to qualify as a see-through trust, meaning you have to be able to look at the trust terms and see who the beneficiary is. The trust also must specify what happens to the RMDs of that qualified account. RMD stands for Required Minimum Distribution, which is an amount that must be distributed out of that account after the initial account holder turns 73 and a half years old. The trust must specify whether the RMD is distributed outright to the trust beneficiary, called a conduit trust, or whether the RMD is held in trust for the beneficiary's benefit. That's called an accumulation trust. The type of trust will determine how long the qualified account can remain qualified after the death of the first decedent, the initial account holder, meaning how long does the trust or the beneficiary have to convert that account into a regular brokerage and pay all the income taxes on it. Again, this is one of the more complicated aspects of estate planning, and oftentimes you may have to decide between tax efficiency, getting the best income tax outcome, versus asset protection, protecting your assets and creating generational wealth, because sometimes you can only get one or the other. A trust may create that generational wealth, but your beneficiaries may pay more in income taxes. There's a lot of balancing that comes with qualified accounts and trusts. So make sure you work with a qualified professional who is familiar with these concepts and can help guide you in your decision making. I have just a few more notes on trust funds that I want to go over quick before I hand the mic, metaphorically, over to Evan. And the first is going to be picking your trustee. There's this theory out there about the 3-generation rule of wealth. And it refers to the common belief that most wealth accumulated by the first generation of a family, so let's say you, is often gone by the time the 3rd generation inherits. So if you leave a trust fund for your kids, by the time it gets to their grandchildren, it'll be gone, either through mismanagement or too many branches of your family tree. There's a few reasons. One step that you can take to avoid that issue is to put some good thought into who you name as the trustee of the trust funds. So let's go through your options. The first is an individual or a family member trustee. With the right distribution provisions, this trustee can be a beneficiary of the trust. You could create a trust for your son's benefit and name your son as, name your son as trustee, provided he's limited to the health, education, maintenance, and support standard of distribution. This is the easiest option because you know your son. You hope you've instilled enough financial wisdom in him to manage the trust fund well. And that usually works for the current generation. You know your kids, you maybe even know your grandkids. Are they financially mature enough to not only understand what they're doing financially, but also to understand the significance and the opportunity that you've gifted to them? In some cases, you may never want a beneficiary to be the trustee of the trust. For example, if you have a child with addiction issues, that's not going to make a good trustee. You know what they're going to do with that money as soon as you're gone. Another scenario where a beneficiary of the trust does not usually make a good trustee is with a blended family. You may create a trust for your spouse, who is not the parent of your children, so that you can take care of your spouse during their lifetime, and that whatever funds are left over eventually go to your kids. If you name that spouse as sole trustee and give them full access to the trust's income and principal, it could be very easy for them to drain the trust, leaving nothing for your kids. Usually in those situations, a third-party trustee, such as a friend or a sibling, is going to be a better option. You've also got the corporate trustee option. Corporate trustees are great because they will preserve the trust fund for future generations and make very conservative distributions. However, corporate trustees do charge a fee for their services, so that's not always worthwhile. Another option you could consider is to have co-trustees. Let's say you do have a child with an addiction and they'll never, as far as you are currently aware, be at a point to manage their own trust. You could name that child as a co-trustee with a sibling that they respect. That way, you always have at least a little security blanket there to make sure the trust isn't spent on the wrong things. The other major decision that you'll have to make if you incorporate these trusts is when assets come out of the trust. When can this money be spent on your beneficiaries and how? You have full control over that. As long as it's not unethical or against public policy, you can dictate the terms of the trust. When I was in private practice, I was a big supporter of trusting your trustee. And what that means is giving them the max amount of flexibility to your trust to make distributions. I would often advise that an independent trustee, meaning someone who isn't benefiting from the trust, could make distributions of principal and income for any reason. An interested trustee, which is usually a trustee who is also a beneficiary of the trust, could make distributions for health, education, maintenance, and support, which is called the HEM standard. This is the IRS standard, which gives the trust the asset protection from federal estate taxes, which I'll talk about more in a few minutes. You can also give as much binding guidance as you want to your trustee. You could say, hey, trustee, distribute $2,000 a month to the beneficiary starting when they turn 25. When they turn 30, they can get $3,000 a month, something like that. I'm not so fond of these strict distribution schedules because while $2,000 a month is a lot right now, it could be pennies 100 years from now, and your trustee could still be legally bound by that obligation. Your trust could be earning $10,000 a month, but your beneficiary only gets $2,000. So now the trust is paying at a higher income tax rate. That may not be the result that you wanted. If you're comfortable, trust your trustee and let them figure out principal and income distributions. Again, taking into account what we just talked about in naming your trustee. The other thing that you can do is to provide guidance. My trustee may do this. My trustee may do that. I request, but do not require, that my trustee make a distribution for my beneficiary's first wedding, something like that. I want my trustee to encourage my beneficiary to sustain their own lifestyle without relying on the trust. Language like that, it's guiding, it's not binding. One last word of advice. Let your trustee know, either in a separate writing or by having a conversation, how you would want the trust fund to be spent. If you want your beneficiary to travel the world and live their best lives, tell your trustee that. Tell them to support that lifestyle. If you're more interested in creating this generational wealth, creating this safety net for your descendants, again, tell your trustee that. Let them know that's your preference. That's going to go a lot further than giving your trustee a bunch of legal terms in a 60-page document. So I have done a lot of talking about estate planning and trust funds. I think it's time for you now, Evan, to talk to us about lifetime gifting.
Yes, let's talk about lifetime gifting. I'll give you guys a little bit of a breather. I think a great place to start is with a simple question. Why are you thinking about gifting in the first place? Is it about leaving a legacy for your family or your community? Or is it more important for you to make an impact now with your time and money? Another common question I get is, do I have enough money to live on this for the rest of my life if I do gift this way? My answer always is it depends. There's no quick formula, no one size fits all answer that you can find in a 60-second video or scribbled on the back of a napkin. The truth is, there are a number of personal and financial factors that come into play, such as what are your other personal goals outside of gifting? When do you want to retire? If you're gifting to charity, how much do you still want to leave to your heirs? Do you subscribe to a die with zero mindset, or do you want to pass on some wealth when it's all over? Are there potential medical expenses in your family that could require a large unexpected outflow of cash? These are not simple yes or no questions. That's why one of the best ways to gain clarity is by speaking with a financial advisor. While no one can predict the future perfectly, we can help you walk through the right exercises and scenarios to make a confident, informed decision. Another common issue our clients run into is gifting now or gifting with warm hands versus leaving an inheritance. I always like to start off by saying planning drives strategy, or your financial plan dictates your investment strategy. This will most likely be different for people in different stages of life. Someone that is 25 will have a vastly different need set and risk tolerance than someone in their 60s. Gifting with warm hands can allow heirs to implement their own financial plans sooner. So I want to take the emotion out of this for a second and dig into some numbers. On your screen, you have a little graph. So let's look at a simple example involving two families. Both want to set aside $5,000 for their children. Family A decides to gift that money now. Family B chooses to hold on to it and gift it later, say in 20 years as part of their estate. Now, here's where the numbers come in. The child in family A invests the gift in a 100% stock portfolio on their own. Family B keeps the money in their own 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio until they pass on. After 20 years, assuming average returns, Family A's child could end up with around $500,000 more than Family B's just from the power of early investing in a more aggressive asset allocation. So, yes, in this scenario, gifting earlier looks better mathematically, but we all know money decisions aren't only about the math. You also need to take into account, is your child financially ready? Are you concerned about spoiling them or affecting their drive or work ethic? And do you want to retain control of this money during your lifetime before you pass it? There's no universal right answer for this question. It all comes down to your values. Have a conversation with your spouse, talk through what feels right for your family, and remember, your financial advisor is there to guide you through both the numbers and the emotions behind these kind of decisions. Now that we have walked through the priorities when gifting and the timing of gifting, let's turn our attention to how we actually gift. I like to start off with this. At a 30,000-foot view, there are three places that your money can go. It can be spent, it can be gifted to friends or charities, or it's going to go to the tax man. Using these vehicles, we can help lower our overall tax liability, aka less money to that tax man, while still hitting our goals of gifting. Many of these vehicles seem complicated at first glance, but once you understand how they work, you'll see the benefit of using them instead of gifting outright cash. Let's take a look at a couple ways of doing that. So one of the most common vehicles we use for gifting is the Donor Advised Fund, or the DAF for short. The Donor Advised Fund acts as a private foundation where contributions are tax deductible upfront. You maintain control of distributions to charities, meaning that you can gift the assets within the Donor Advised Fund at any time now or in the future. The Donor Advised Fund allows you to gift appreciated stock or stock with large taxable gains into the DAF to relieve yourself from paying capital gains if otherwise sold. We see many people gift shares of Meta and Google that they've had for 20 years. They're able to hit their goal of gifting, also sidestepping that large tax burden. The Donor Advised Fund is a great vehicle for gifting to organizations, but this is not going to be a vehicle that you use to gift to family or friends. The distributions from the Donor Advised Fund must go to an IRS qualified 501c3 organization. Lastly, we can lump sum multiple years of contributions to help you itemize your deductions. Let's take a look at a visual to better understand how the Donor Advised Fund actually works. So you can see on the screen, you can donate cash, stock, bonds, crypto, business interests, and other assets into the Donor Advised Fund, get an immediate tax deduction up front, and then grant that money to a 501c3 charity anytime in the future. So as you can see, you do not have to pick just one charity and stick with it for the rest of the Donor Advised Fund. You can donate to any 501c3 at any time. I think the DAF is a great place to start gifting when you sell a business or during high income years. And there's one thing to note, the big beautiful bill will change some of this gifting for itemized taxpayers slightly. So starting in 2026, there is a 0.5% floor on deductions for charitable contributions. This means that if your aggregate gross income, your AGI, is, for example, $1 million in 2026, the first $5,000 of charitable contributions, whether directly contributed or contributed to a donor advised fund, will not be deductible. This all means that if you're expecting a large taxable income for 2025 and 2026, it might make sense to front load some of those charitable deductions for this year, 2025. An advisor at Savant can help you walk through these scenarios and help you design a plan that includes changes from the big beautiful bill.
Hey, Evan, can I interrupt you and ask a quick question?
Sure, fire away.
What is the difference between a donor advised fund and a private foundation?
A donor advised fund is going to be better for most people. A private foundation is a larger endeavor. And so you're going to be able to hold real estate and other non-traditional investments inside that private foundation. They also have some more customizable gifting rules. So it's kind of the Cadillac, and then the donor advised fund is very much your Camry that just gets you down the road. Um, I think the donor advised fund is better for most people when it comes to gifting. It has much less startup costs and much less startup time into it. Very little administrative fees and strain, and there's no excise tax on investment income in the donor advised fund, whereas in the private foundation, they have some excise tax in there. So I think just for the masses, start at the donor advised fund, and then we could probably move into the private foundation if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's move on to another way that we can gift tax efficiently. You can also gift stock without the use of a DAF to a qualified charitable organization. It allows taxpayers to avoid paying long-term capital gains on low basis investments, again, without the use of the donor advised fund. The deduction is subject to 30% AGI, aggregate gross income limitations. So for example, if your AGI is 100,000, the max stock donation deduction that you can take is $30,000 for that year. So let's take a look at an example of this. So in this example, we own ABC stock that's had record returns. The fair market value is now $50,000 and the cost basis is $5,000. Federal long-term capital gains rates are 15% and our personal tax rate is 24%. We have two options when trying to gift here. Option one would be to sell ABC stock, pay the capital gains from the sale of $6,750, and then donate those proceeds. In this scenario, because we sold the stock and had to pay the capital gains, we only saved $3,600 or so. Option two is to contribute the ABC stock directly to the charity. In this scenario, we donate the stock so we never have to sell it. This allows us to bypass those capital gains that we would have had to pay and save around $12,000 in taxes. Donating these highly appreciated assets can be a powerful tool in charitable planning. So lastly, let's take a look at a way to gift from your IRA. As Alaina said earlier, the IRS requires individuals that have IRAs to distribute some of the IRA each year starting at age 73. This is called a required minimum distribution or an RMD. Basically, the IRS is tired of you deferring taxes and wants to start getting paid in the form of tax money from distributions. A qualified charitable distribution, or a QCD, a lot of three-letter acronyms, is an excellent strategy for people with large IRAs that are already planning on gifting. You can gift under up to $100,000 each year if you're over the age 70 and a half. Note that this is not the same age as when someone would start taking RMDs at age 73. The amount you donate through a QCD is totally excluded from taxable income, which can help lower overall tax liability. I like to make one note here too. Make sure you tell your CPA or tax professional about the QCDs that you make throughout the year, as they're not going to be identified on your Form 1099-R. And so if you're not telling your CPA, they will have no idea if you've made QCDs or not. Qualified charitable distributions are a great way to support charities while fulfilling RMD obligations because the QCDs actually count towards your RMDs for that year. So Alaina, now I'm going to throw it back over to you to talk about gifting from an estate tax perspective. Fun.
Great. Estate taxes, everyone's favorite topic. So I'm just going to briefly touch on federal estate and gift taxes. These are taxes that apply to all wealth transfers, whether those transfers happen at death, via your estate plan, or during your life. Like we just discussed with Evan, if a transfer of wealth happens during your life, it is a gift and it is therefore subject to gift taxes. If it happens at your death, it's subject to estate or death taxes. You can gift up to $19,000 in the year 2025 to anyone every year without incurring any tax liability. If you exceed that $19,000 amount or whatever it is the year of your gift, that transfer is subject to gift taxes. However, there is a current federal estate and gift tax exemption amount of $13.99 million per person. With this exemption, you can transfer up to that 13.99 million amount during your lifetime or at death before any taxes are due. If you make transfers during your lifetime, it eats away at the exemption that you have remaining at your death. So you can see here a history of the estate tax exemption amount and how it's steadily increased since 2017. When we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, it raised the federal estate tax exemption from 5 million previously up to 10 million. Under the current tax law, it will increase with inflation each year as well. So a few things to note. The estate exemption is per person. So a married couple can actually pass double this amount before any taxes are due. That's right. So a married couple can transfer up to $27,980,000 before any federal estate or gift tax is due. So that's a lot. Second reminder, estate and gift taxes are, like every other tax, controlled by Congress. Just because this is the law now does not mean that it will always be that way. And we've seen those fluctuations in the past. So keep that in mind and make sure you always consult with your financial advisor or legal or tax professional before doing any big gifting. Third, Evan just discussed this. Charitable gifts are fully deductible, and that includes from estate taxes. If your estate is worth $15 million, you can leave the entire thing or just the overage to charity, and your estate will pay no federal estate taxes. Last, this tax does not just apply to liquid assets or cash. It applies to gifts of business interest, of real estate, of life insurance proceeds. I see this all the time where clients want to add a child to their home, for example, with the goal of avoiding probate, not realizing that you've made a taxable gift and you need to file a 709. Again, your professionals will be your best friends if you're looking to transfer any sort of assets to friends or family members and you want to avoid any unintentional tax consequence. One more thing. You may not be close to the federal estate tax exemption amount of 13.99 million, but you may need to worry about state estate taxes. So in this map here, you'll see which states impose their own estate and inheritance tax. The difference between an estate tax and an inheritance tax is that the estate tax is paid by the estate of the person that died. Assets are only distributed out of the estate after the estate tax is paid. With an inheritance tax, the beneficiary who receives the inheritance pays the tax personally. And you'll see that little bitty Maryland right there does have both. So if you are a Marylander, please discuss this with your advisors ASAP. However, just like the federal estate tax, these states do have varying exemption amounts. But unlike the estate tax, which is a flat 40%, many of these states have progressive rates. One thing that I want to emphasize here is that the state estate tax is typically imposed on top of federal estate tax. You may get a deduction on your federal estate tax for certain estate taxes, but if you're in one of these states, it's something to worry about. So if you think that it would be worthwhile to your estate to do some lifetime gifting for estate tax planning purposes, I want to go over the steps of gifting with you, as well as reiterate the benefits and risks. So the first step of gifting is deciding who your beneficiaries will be and whether you want to gift assets to them outright or in trust. However, this presentation is about preserving generational wealth. And as I've already said, a trust is the absolute best way to do that. So if you are thinking about doing any substantial lifetime gifting, I do recommend looking into a trust as a vehicle to hold that gift. Once you've made that decision, though, you need to prepare your assets for transfer. You may need to get approval or permission from business partners, spouses, things like that. Get all those ducks in a row. Third, transfer the actual assets. Sign the deeds, move the accounts, assign the business interests. The day that those documents get signed or the assets get moved is the day that you'll need to provide a valuation for, which is the fourth step. Once you have that date and a discernibly gifted asset, make sure you have the valuations. The IRS requires you to provide adequate disclosure on the value of the gift. And what that means will depend on the asset itself. So real estate, you may get a valuation from a realtor, a business interest, you'll have to get some sort of business valuation done. It really depends. Lastly, file the trust agreements if you have them, the transfer documents, anything related to these transactions with a 709 gift tax return. The gift tax return is due on April 15th, tax day, of the year after the gift is made, along with your personal income tax return. However, if you can file an extension, you can file an extension for your 709 if you file an extension for your personal returns as well to October 15th. The best advice I will give you today is do not wait until September of that following year to try to get valuations and appraisals done. A timely filed 709 starts a 3-year statute of limitations for the IRS to contest the values of the gift that you've made. And in exchange for taking all of these steps, you'll not only use your historically high estate tax exemption, you'll freeze the value of any growth of those gifted assets. And you'll be providing additional creditor protection in the event that you're ever sued because those assets are no longer in your estate. And not to be too cliche, but with great reward does come some risk. First off, please know that this is not usually a cheap endeavor. And if it is, something has gone wrong. You want to make sure you work with an attorney who specializes in this area of law. You will pay for that expertise. Same goes for the CPA who files your return and who you get to appraise your assets, provide those valuations. Also, generally speaking, assets that are gifted do not get a step up in basis for income tax purposes at your death, which is why it's important to analyze which assets you're gifting before transferring them to a trust. And lastly, your gift tax return can get audited. The IRS can come back and challenge the values that you've used. Anytime you're audited, your legal expenses challenging it can add up. So do not go down this road with a faint of heart. It could be for you, it could not. Definitely something to look into. The last thing that I want to show y'all is what I call the ABCs of estate planning. And the whole point of this slide is to demonstrate how complicated estate tax planning can get. These are all acronyms for different trusts that you can set up during your lifetime and different tools used for gifting. This is very complicated. Please do not go down this road without a good team of support. There are very real tax consequences to lifetime gifting that you may not be familiar with, and that can take a lot of analysis to work through correctly. One more side note. These trusts are usually much more complex while you're alive. The descendants trusts that I talked about earlier that are created at your death are much easier to understand and administer once you're no longer with us. So don't let complicated estate tax planning defer you from looking into creating those descendants trusts at your death.
Thank you. I'm going to allow you to teach my future kids those ABCs. I'll teach them the normal ones first, and then you can go in after maybe
I'm
kindergarten,
going to
first
be
grade
their
or something.
favorite aunt. Yep.
All right, well, let's move on to asset allocation and location and why they're so important when talking about generational wealth. So to start, asset allocation is by far the most effective means of capturing market returns. Selecting the right mix of assets is an important step in the investment process. Many tend to focus on less important factors, such as stock selection or market timing, think GME, that kind of stuff. Academic research tells us that stocks have a higher return than bonds, but that obviously doesn't translate to a recommendation of owning all stocks in every case. We use bonds as the risk reducers in our portfolios, allowing us to have access to capital in times of market downturns, while also generating some steady income. If your total portfolio is 70% stock, 30% bonds, it doesn't mean that every account needs to be 70% stock, 30% bonds. When thinking about generational planning, you should consider having different allocations for different buckets of assets. Maybe you have a trust that won't be used for a long period of time. It may be beneficial to have more aggressive stock mix inside that specific account. Whereas in your primary spending account for living needs, it probably does not need to have all stock in it. It should have some bonds and some cash for liquidity purposes. Again, asset allocation and location play such a huge factor in wealth preservation. Finding the right strategy to optimize returns and protect the portfolio from inflation and economic downturn are important for passing down wealth. There are many factors that play into changing your asset allocation when that time comes. It may be a life event like retirement, change in career, or some people just can't stand the volatility within stocks, whatever it might be. I think the best way to understand how a change in asset allocation will affect your overall plan is to talk with a financial advisor. So let's take a deeper look into tax efficiency and asset location. Here at Savant, we are very aware of taxes and aim to create portfolios that are extremely tax efficient. So as you can see on your screen right now, we have three different buckets. Start off with the dark blue bucket. This is the Roth bucket, consisting of both Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks. These are after-tax dollars that are invested, so there's no tax on earnings or accumulation when distributed. Then in the green bucket, these are qualified plans like 401ks and traditional IRAs. There's no tax whatsoever until the money is distributed from the plan, and then everything is taxed at your ordinary income tax rates. And then finally, the red bucket over here, these are trusts or taxable accounts. Interest and short-term capital gains are taxed at your ordinary income tax rates, while dividends and long-term capital gains are taxed at the preferential 15% tax rates. And again, it's not just about what you invest in. It's also about where you're going to hold those investments. So I want to give you a couple examples. REITs, real estate investment trusts, and bonds generate income. That income is taxed at ordinary income tax rates. That's why they're a good fit for traditional IRAs, where you can defer those taxes until later on. Individual stocks often go into taxable accounts, similar to what Alaina was saying earlier, because your beneficiaries can receive a step up in some cases when they inherit them, potentially avoiding a large capital gains bill. International stocks are generally better outside of IRAs. In a taxable account, you may qualify for the foreign tax credit, but in an IRA, that benefit is totally lost. And then finally, your highest growth investments, think early stage small cap companies and an aggressive stock fund, are ideal for Roth IRAs because the future appreciation can grow entirely tax free. I know that was a lot, but in short, we allocate funds at the household level, not the account level, because it allows us to save time, money by locating assets in the most tax efficient account types. These are our small items and changes that add up to generational wealth in the long run. So let's move on to passing down knowledge. Let's be honest here. Estate planning is an extremely tough topic. It brings together two of the most uncomfortable conversations that we can have, one about death and one about money. And for many families, that's exactly where the conversation ends or before it even starts. Why is that? And Alaina kind of alluded to this earlier. Culturally, we are taught to value self-sufficiency, hard work, and the American dream. The idea of inheriting wealth can feel like it challenges those exact values. It can make even successful people feel uneasy, like they've stepped outside the merit-based story that we've always told ourselves. As a result, estate planning often happens in silence. Parents don't explain their plans, heirs don't ask any questions, and families miss the opportunities to pass down more than just assets. They miss the chance to pass down wisdom. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go tell your heirs exactly how much they're getting in a dollar percent. That's not the point. What I am encouraging you to do is share the basics of your plan, talk openly about what's worked and what hasn't worked. These conversations don't just prepare your family financially, they help shape character, values, and lead to a healthier relationship with money for the next generation. So, one of the biggest issues that me and Alaina run into is simple but costly. When a loved one passes away, the family often has no idea where things are at. Things like which banks they used, where the investment accounts are held, who to contact about trust or wills, or even who the trustee is. It's a completely overwhelming process, especially in a very emotional time. That's why Alaina and I walk through this detailed estate planning guide. It's quickly become one of our favorite exercises, not because it's fun. You can ask Alaina, it's not very fun, but because it's
It's not
practical.
fun. He's right.
It is practical, and incredibly relieving to have all this important information in one specific place. So this guide includes things like key contacts, account access details, legal documents, and other critical information that will make things much easier for you or your loved ones when that time comes. And I also like to say estate planning isn't just about the dollars and documents. Alaina and I go through beyond the financial side, think through the personal sides of things too. So, for example, and this is my favorite example, if you have an iPhone, set up the legacy contact feature. This lets a trusted person access your iPhone in photos, videos, if anything were to happen to you. Now, we're not tech experts, but this is a small step with huge emotional impacts for families. Just Google iPhone legacy contact, and it takes about 2 minutes to set up. It's an easy win and a very meaningful one. So let's move on. When it comes to passing down knowledge, I like to break it out into two main categories. So the first category is short-term knowledge. This is your basic blocking and tackling of personal finance. It includes practical foundational skills like how to safely use credit and credit cards, how to build and follow a budget, understand the basic account types, checking, savings, IRAs, etc., and a simple introduction into investing and accounting. Along the way, I want you to share your experiences with money and investing, the good and the bad. Let's just say a child is excited about crypto or something like that. Rather than just dismissing Bitcoin, try asking, what made you interested in this in the first place? Or do you have an exit plan to sell this investment? Even if you don't think you like the investment or love the investment, they are learning. Every win or loss is extremely valuable to a young investor. And then the second category is long-term knowledge. So this is where we shift from tactics to values and belief systems, the deeper lessons that build character and support wealth that lasts. So I get asked, what's the best way to teach this? It's for you to live it. Model the values that helped you succeed in the first place. So that either that's discipline, generosity, gratitude, or delayed gratification. One of my favorite examples of living it is a family that gave their kids an allowance, but they had a subset of rules around that allowance. So 30% had to go to charity, 30% went into savings, and 40% they could spend freely every month when they got the allowance. I just thought it was a great way to embed the values of giving, saving, and spending all at once into these young kids. And one more key piece, like Alaina was saying earlier, you need to build out the right team. Help your heirs assemble a trusted group of professionals. So that includes, a financial advisor, a CPA, an estate planning attorney, and maybe other specialists that they might need. When you or your heirs are able to lean on that team, you guys are freed up to focus on what you do best and avoid costly mistakes. Especially for heirs inheriting wealth for the first time, a good team can make all of the difference. So, in short, teach the fundamentals early, model the values that matter, and surround your family with the support that can last. That's how you pass down more than money. That's how you pass down the wisdom. Lastly, here at Savant, wealth management does not just entail investments. It is the engine that drives the car, yes, but it's not the only thing we do. We look at wealth management in a holistic manner to create a cohesive plan, as well as work with other professionals to give you the best experience possible. I'm going to toss it back to Alaina now to talk through some moral and fiscal responsibilities.
So I mentioned this earlier, the 3-generation rule of wealth, that by the time the 3rd generation rolls in, they're not working, they're lazy bums living off the trust fund. This is probably not what you had in mind when you created these trusts. So how do you avoid that? Evan just talked about passing down knowledge. I want to finish our talk today by also telling you how to pass down morals and financial responsibility. If you haven't created that very strict trust to avoid a trust fund baby, which essentially means preventing someone from becoming entitled or financially irresponsible due to inheriting a large sum of money, focus on instilling strong work ethic, financial literacy, and a sense of responsibility in your children from a young age, especially if you plan on leaving them that large inheritance. Openly communicate about the existence and conditions of any trust fund with them as they mature. Also, encourage them to continue these conversations with their own kids. Make sure these morals are multi-generational. Tell them how this money was earned and the sacrifices that you made to get here. Remember, this is your legacy. Those kids better remember it. And with that, we are done for today. We do have a link in the chat box to schedule an introductory call to see if we can help you with your unique circumstances. Otherwise, we will be going through a couple of questions. All right, let's see what we have here today.
Right.
Okay.
Alaina, do you want me to take the first one?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, I see one. How do I know which stocks are the best to gift? And so we get this question a lot as well. I usually point to highly appreciated stocks first. So stocks with low cost basis and high market value. The significant increase in value that comes with the difference between market value and cost basis comes with a large capital gain. So gifting highly appreciated stock is a great way to sidestep some of that if otherwise sold. I would avoid gifting anything that has lost value in the stock space. You'd be better off selling it, harvesting the capital loss, and then gifting cash in those situations. But again, obviously, if you're having trouble deciding what stocks to gift, please come ask one of the advisors at Savant a question. We'd be happy to help.
Great, thanks, Evan. I will take the next one.
Yeah.
How do I pick a trustee? What makes a good candidate for someone to help preserve my wealth if my kids are young? So when advising on personally picking that trustee, what I always recommend right there in the title is you do have to trust them. This person does not need to be the most financially savvy person in the world, but it does have to be someone that you trust enough to know that they're going to make good judgment calls on behalf of your young children. And again, if you can't think of an individual, there are corporate trustees available, but there should always be someone that you feel comfortable with.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Alaina. Looks like we have time for one more. So this one says, you seem like a good team. Yes, we are.
We
Would my
are.
estate planning attorney work with an advisor? So at a financial advisor, I'm assuming. Yeah, Alaina and I work closely with many estate planning attorneys. We're based in Atlanta, but I know everybody else works with estate planning attorneys as well. We actually just had a call with a estate planning attorney last week where we were bouncing ideas off of each other for the client's needs. So yes, in essence, we work with CPAs, accountants, anybody, any specialists, and also estate planning attorneys.
Yeah. And with that, I think we are done today. Thank you so much, y'all, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll see you again soon.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
If you enjoyed this webinar, visit savantwealth.com/guides and download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources.